If you want it spelled right on the radio, then yes.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. I'm Reverend Benjamin Reynolds, BenjaminReyNolds, and I am honored to serve as Faith Director for Illinois Unites for Marriage Equality. We are eager to share and to take your questions, and so I will be brief. This morning, I stand with you in community with other members of the clergy who are proud residents of Illinois and supporters of the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. SB 10 protects religious freedom while at the same time extends the freedom to marry to all couples, including those that are same-sex here in the state of Illinois. There is a human dimension when we are confronted with issues such as marriage equality. When two people, regardless of gender, are in love and share a committed relationship, they are indeed human beings with faces and names and families. As a person of faith, I cannot lose sight of the individual struggles, the individual pain, the humility, and their faces. If we neglect faces, we neglect the gospel, the good news to all. The Freedom to Marry and Fairness Act connects us with those names and faces and acknowledges in our democracy that same-sex couples, our brothers and sisters, our families, are a part of the human race. Beings, human and whole, have every right to stand on the same privileges of freedom, justice, and equality afforded to every other living, breathing human being in this state. Therefore, I call upon legislators, fellow clergy, and people of faith throughout Illinois to stand united on the principles of fairness, justice, and equality and pass the Marriage Fairness Act now. Thank you. I will now introduce Pastor Delman Coates from the Mount Eden Baptist Church, Clinton, Maryland, who will come.
Good morning. My name is Delman Coates, Reverend Delman Coates. That's spelled D as in David, E-L-M-A-N, Coates, C-O-A-T-E-S. I pastor the Mount Ennon Baptist Church in Clinton, Maryland, and I'm also the president of the Black Church Center for Justice and Equality, a public policy advocacy group for progressive African American churches. I pastor a congregation in a state that boasts 30% of the electorate African Americans, predominantly African American Christians. And we were successful in 2012 in passing marriage equality in the state of Maryland at a time when most people assumed that African Americans and African American Christians were fundamentally opposed to the idea of marriage equality. I've been traveling around the country as a clergy leader to dispel the myth and to dispel the notion that African American clergy leaders and that African American Christians are fundamentally opposed to the idea of the state extending freedoms to all citizens and all residents of the state. One of my testimony is that in 2012 was the best year in the history of our church. We added over 1,000 people in our congregation. We went from 7,000 to 8,000 members at a time when people thought that marriage equality would be the end of our church and the end of our ministry. And I think that happened because people in our community and our faith community understood and understand that it's critically important that we recognize that the role of the state is decidedly different than the role of the church. The role of the state is to protect the freedoms of every member, every citizen, every resident of our state. And so we were successful in marriage in Maryland because we were able to help to frame the issue of marriage equality in its appropriate public policy context. Religious marriage is the province of religious institutions. and civil marriage is the province of the state. And it is the obligation of the state to protect all of her citizens. It is critical and it is important in a free, pluralistic democracy that we help people to understand that it is our call and it is our challenge to live in our faith, not to legislate. And so I am honored and glad to be here today with clergy leaders in Illinois, because there are similarities between the challenges that we faced and that we encountered in Maryland and the challenges that are faced here in this state. And so I'm here today to join these clergy leaders in shifting the narrative that is so often told around where clergy leaders and people of faith stand on the question of marriage equality. I'm glad to be here today to join these leaders and many others in encouraging legislators in this state in supporting and passing marriage equality legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Coates. We appreciate your support. Reverend Brenda Lee.
Good morning. I'm Reverend Brenda Lee, B-R-E-N-D-A-L-E-E. Today, as a minister with the Universal Fellowship of Metropolitan Community Churches, as a resident of Illinois living on the south side of Chicago, and as a partner of a beautiful and lovely lady, my beloved Lee, with whom I have been in a wonderful and loving relationship for the past 10 years. I speak passionately in support of the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. Our story is like the stories of many couples throughout the state of Illinois, when two people find each other, fall in love, and want to share a lifetime of commitment and responsibility together. We are among those who are same-gender loving couples, whose desire is to care for our families through the stability, the security, and the protection under the law of marriage by the state in which we live and we work. The passing of the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act will give us this opportunity to make our hopes and our dreams to be married a reality. So this day, I join my fellow clergy as people of faith, united to call upon our elected officials and other clergy to stand with us on the principles of freedom and fairness and pass the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now have remarks from Reverend Julian Deshazier, pastor of the University Church, United Church of Christ.
Good morning. Reverend Julian Deshazier, Julian Julian, Deshazier Deshazier, pastor at University Church in Hyde Park. Today, as a member of clergy and as a proud resident of Illinois, I rise to announce my affirmative support of the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. My generation has inherited unprecedented freedoms, freedoms which have come in consideration of fairness and human dignity because of people who could look beyond religious ignorance and envision a more perfect union. We have overwhelmed injustice before and must not let intolerance and bigotry deny us from offering the same legal protection that must belong to all of Illinois citizens. This is a matter of freedom. This is a matter of fairness and of correcting the mistakes of our past to make democracy real. I stand as clergy and on behalf of a generation that wants our elders and elected officials to end discrimination because it is the right thing to do. And I hope others will rise with me. Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Reverend Dawnn Brumfield.
Reverend Dawnn Brumfield, I serve as the Associate Worship Pastor at Urban Village Church in the Hyde Park, Woodlawn location. Name spelled DAWNNBRUMFIELD. This morning I stand as a proud resident in the state of Illinois and a member of clergy who unapologetically announces my support of the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. Freedom and justice are not only core tenets of my faith, but they are principles that should form our democracy. Today, I urge our legislators to uphold these principles and act fairly toward people who deserve equal liberties under the law. This is not a soundbite or a bandwagon moment for me. I have a personal stake in this work. The law upholds many rules and regulations that govern how we should function in our society. And legislating how fast I drive or what taxes I pay or on what side of the street I park is understandable. But telling me who I can or cannot marry is, simply put, unfair. Marriage fairness is preserving equality before the law and treating all Illinois citizens seeking marriage fairly. Religious freedom absolves clergy and it holds harmless our churches who seek to act justly by marrying all loving, committed couples. There is no conflict here. This is not a matter of more freedom. This is a matter of equal freedom. When the United States Supreme Court upholds fairness, allowing for marriage equality, and when the oldest and most revered civil rights organization in our nation, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, takes a bold position to support fairness, and when countless numbers of fair-minded, justice-seeking people and people of faith stand together in supporting marriage fairness, as reflected in recent polling, we do know that God is still speaking. So today I urge our elected officials and my fellow clergy members to stand united on the principles of freedom, fairness, and justice, and pass the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawnn. Dr. Eddie Kornegay, who serves as the founder of the Baldwin Delaney Institute at Chicago Theological Seminary, as well as an adjunct professor of theology.
Dr. Eddie Kornegay, E-D-D-I-E, K-O-R-N-E-G-A-Y. Today, as a scholar, activist, and person of faith, I affirm my support of the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. We stand on the gains of Seneca, Selma, and Stonewall, all sites where the fight for the principles of freedom, justice, and fairness was first notched and continues to this day to be interwoven into the fabric of American democracy. We are calling on our legislature to act to uphold these principles, recognizing too the religious freedom, that religious freedom be protected in this bill. Therefore, we can all dare to take the risk of faith needed to further forge a horizon of equal measure that is responsive and compassionate, neither pronouncing judgment nor subjecting to censure same-sex couples seeking legal protection under the law of the state of Illinois. I call upon our elected officials and all of God's children whose civil liberties are etched onto the cornerstone of freedom by Seneca, Selma, and Stonewall, and dare I say, even Calvary, to press together, unite on the principles of fairness and justice, and pass the Marriage Fairness Act.
Thank you, Dr. Kornegay. Let me introduce Reverend Jamie Frazier, pastor of the Lighthouse Church of Chicago.
Pastor Jamie Frazier, that's J-A-M-I-E, Frazier, F-R-A-Z-I-E-R. I serve as pastor of the Lighthouse Church of Chicago. We are an African-American congregation that is rooted in the Black church tradition of worshiping Christ as liberator and working structurally to empower those who sit and stand on the margins. We endeavor to be a church that is both passionate about Jesus as well as serious about justice. It is with an attentive ear to history, a keen eye to justice, and an open heart to fairness that I rise to support the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. The Illinois State Legislature, during the upcoming veto session, must call marriage equality to the floor of the State House and pass it. The measure must be passed so that this state, and indeed this country, can make good on its promise to be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I cannot accept the notion that the guiding constellations of justice and equality do not shine as brightly for gays and lesbians as they do for others. The Declaration of Independence says otherwise. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights says otherwise. The Supreme Court, in its overturning of the Defense of Marriage Act, says otherwise. The tax dollars of LGBT folk says otherwise. Beloved, the young people of this state are watching the struggle. The LGBT folks of this state are watching this struggle. History is watching this struggle. God is watching this struggle. And the moral creator of the universe and history do not embrace bigotry, but rather justice, courage, and never cowardice. I offer these words to every member of the Illinois House of Representatives. They are the words of Bayard Rustin, an African-American, same-gender loving man who organized the 1963 March on Washington. Every indifference to prejudice is suicide, because if I don't fight all bigotry, bigotry itself will be strengthened, and sooner or later it will return on me.
Thank you, Pastor Jamie. Reverend Dawnn McIntosh.
Dr. Dawnn McIntosh, D-O-N-I-Q-U-E, M-C, capital I-N-T-O-S-H. Today, as Associate Pastor of Namaste United Church of Christ and resident of the state of Illinois, I stand here to announce and show my support for the Religious Freedom and Marriage Fairness Act. Freedom, justice, and fairness are core ideals of both our faith and our democracy. Because of our commitment to these ideals, I stand here to impress upon our legislators the necessity of passing this bill. I am reminded of the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who, in his I Have a Dream speech, said, "We are here in this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. Now is not the time for the luxury of cooling off or the taking of the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. The same ideals that drove hundreds of thousands to that moment 50 years ago are the same ideals that drive us here to this moment today. Those ideals are fairness and equality, a basic belief in fairness and equality between people. We too are here at this moment, this hollow spot, to remind you, Illinois, of the fierce urgency of now. Now is the time to support religious freedom. Now is the time to let justice prevail. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy for all of Illinois citizens. The highest court in the land recognized the fierce urgency of now. 13 other states and the District of Columbia recognized the fierce urgency of now. The NAACP recognized the fierce urgency of now. And countless other fair-minded people and people of faith recognize the fierce urgency of now. I urge you to see the moment for what it is and pass this bill. It is fair, it is just, and it is time.
Finally, then, we will hear from the Reverend Charles Strait, pastor of the Faith United Methodist Church.
Thank you. My name is Charles Strait, C-H-A-R-L-E-S-M-A-X-S-T-R-A-I-G-H-T, in case you need to know my middle name. I am a proud pastor of the Faith United Methodist Church of Dalton, Illinois, and I am proud to be here this morning in support of the Marriage Fairness Act. We are standing in a historic time. In 1865, only 27 states ratified the amendment that enacted the Emancipation Proclamation. During the tumultuous times of the 50s and 60s, only about 5% of the black church was really at the forefront of civil rights movement and did the hard work of making sure that all citizens could have access to equality in this country. Today, in this country, we are also in a very historic moment for the people of our nation. And today, in the state of Illinois, I want to appeal to legislators to say to them, we can choose to be on the right side of history, along with those folk who came before us, who enacted so many wonderful legislations that have given us the rights and the equality that we celebrate in many parts of our country today. We can stand on the right side of history. We can do the right thing. The right thing is often very difficult to do. Many times we have to struggle with those who will threaten us and ostracize us and tell us for their own selfish reasons that it's not the right thing, it's not the fair thing, it will injure others. But we do understand that what we do to support the love of individuals within our states cannot possibly injure the ones who already celebrate the rights and freedoms that we fight for today. I want to quote Dr. King as he said, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, struggle, and suffering. Tireless, passionate, and concerned, dedicated individuals must be at the forefront of that fight. Today, I want to stand with my brothers and sisters in ministry, in the Christian faith, to ask, to plead with our elected officials to stand with us as part of that tireless group of passionate and concerned clergy who dedicate themselves, who will be a part of those individuals who will suffer, who will sacrifice, and who will struggle to realize marriage fairness in Illinois. It's something that we must do because it's the right thing to do and because the citizens of Illinois deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Strait. We'll entertain questions at this time. Yes.
I have two questions, if I may, please. And I apologize, I got to run here in just a minute, so hopefully I can get an answer. This is, could somebody please talk about the religious freedom provisions of this legislation? Because as you know, there are opponents who are saying that this is an affront to religious freedom. Discuss their concerns and whether you think they're being satisfied. Would you please?
That's your first question?
Yeah.
All right.
So the second question, if you want to know,
sure.
You know, Reverend Meeks and some other heavy hitters ran a campaign in the spring against this, and I want to know if you have word that they're doing anything this time around.
Okay, to answer your second question, I have not heard about what Meeks and the others are doing, and part of our efforts today are for us to be able to hear other voices that are out there who are speaking loud and just as loud as perhaps the voices that may be against this work. And so our purpose and goal is to raise those other voices and lift those before you today. To answer your first question, in terms of religious freedom, this bill actually gives us an opportunity. I think that just to be quite honest with you, any church has the right to decide, a pastor or a religious leader has the right to say to marry, whether they're going to marry or not marry any couple. And this bill just further endorses that, regardless of the sex of the couple. Yes.